and welcome back to my channel. My name is Natalie, and on this channel we talk all things crafting, but primarily knitting. Today I'm wearing my Bogey Birdie top. This is by Lisu Knits on Instagram, and I knit mine in Noro Kureyon. I forgot the shade, but everything is on my Ravelry if you're actually interested in figuring that out. Today I thought I would do a yarn stash tour. And the main reason I want to do this is because in the next 6 months or so, I really want to focus on knitting down my stash. I put myself on a soft no-buy for that time period, and it should end in March, which is my birthday, and I think that's perfect timing. In the last 9 months or so that I've been knitting, I have acquired a good deal of yarn, and honestly it's a little bit overwhelming for me. Like, I have this one plastic bin that I said you should not be able to buy yarn if it doesn't fit in the bin, and I have broken that rule. So it's time to knit my stash down to a manageable size and not get tempted by all the new yarn drops or new projects that might inspire me to buy yarn. So in an effort to focus on loving the yarn that I already have, I've already gone ahead and picked projects for each of the yarns that I'm talking about today. I might change my mind in the future, but I thought it'd be at least good to have an idea of what I want to do with each of them so I can get started. So in terms of the yarn I'm going to talk about today, I won't be talking about any yarn from current whips. You can watch the podcast episode if you're interested in seeing those. I also won't be talking about scrap yarn. I think scrap busting is a whole other category of knitting, and I have a lot of scraps of like one or less than one skein left over from various projects that I don't quite know what to do with yet, so I won't be talking about those here today. Additionally, the type of garments I like to knit are, first of all, garments. I don't really knit accessories, socks, or shawls, just based on my lifestyle and what I like knitting. And in terms of garments, I like a mix of classic garments, think PetiteKnit, and also some trendier garments like the ones I'm wearing today. So how I plan on going through this video is I'm going to start with my lightest weight and move all the way up to my Aran Weight yarns. For each of the yarns, I'm going to talk about how I came to obtain the yarn and then also my ideas for how I want to use the yarn. So without further ado, let's get into the yarn stash tour. So starting off, we have my lace weight yarns, and I've also thrown in a Suri alpaca into this category because it's in line with the type of projects I'm talking about for my other lace weight yarns, which are primarily mohairs. So I figured even if it's a slightly different yarn weight, I would just mention it in this section to keep it cohesive. Also, I will be mentioning all of my mohairs in the section that I plan on using solo for projects, but if there is a mohair that I have that I plan on holding with a heavier weight yarn, I'll just mention it with the heavier weight yarn instead of in this category. So some of the mohairs you might see later on in the video. But let's start with this first yarn, which is a hand-dyed mohair skein from Qing Fibre. This is their Kid Mohair Silk in the shade Flax, and I have 3 skeins of this in my stash. Now, when I first saw this on Qing Fibre's website, first of all, I've been following Qing Fibre for a very long time on Instagram, but I never really bit the bullet and bought any of the yarn until this one. And I didn't buy it associated with any particular drop, I just saw it in stock on their website and I thought it looked pretty, so I picked it up. But when I got it in person, you can't even really see it on camera, but there's a little bit of a green twinge to the undertone, and I don't know if it looks that great against my skin tone. Like, I think I wish it was a little bit warmer of a brown than the one that I currently have, but nonetheless, I still want to knit with it. It's not so ugly or anything that like I wouldn't want to wear it or I'd want to sell it. So the first option I have is holding it with another yarn. I don't currently have another yarn that would match it well, but I could save it and see if there's a yarn that would look good with it that I would wear. But my other idea for this is to knit the Bennie sweater. Now, I've already knit a Bennie sweater before. I knit it in this yarn that I found in the back of my mom's closet from when I was younger, and that shirt is so itchy. I want to make a nicer version of it basically, because I also barely had enough yarn to finish the short sleeve version and it sits right below my boobs. So it's not super wearable even after I blocked it. But the Bennie sweater also includes instructions for making a long sleeve version with bell sleeves, and I think I'm going to knit that with this yarn. One thing about the pattern is there's really no shaping in the back, so I also want to try adding short row shaping to help with the fit a little bit. The next yarn that I have to show you in the lace weight category is this. This is the Knitting for Olive compatible cashmere, and it's in the shade Gray Lamb. and I have 2 skeins of this. I got this with the intention of making the basic bra by TiffKnit. TiffKnit pretty much only does like undergarments or very like sheer, close to the body tops, and they're all knitted in cashmere, or at least recommended to be knit in cashmere. So I picked up this Knitting for Olive compatible cashmere with another order of Knitting for Olive that I was already putting out, and I have yet to knit it, mainly because I didn't have any elastic and I had kind of procrastinated buying some, so I couldn't knit the bottom band. Additionally, there's a little bit of measurement and math involved, and even if it's easy, that always puts me off a little from starting a pattern. And this is also on extra tiny needles, like I think they're 2mm needles, which is much smaller than what I usually work on. So this one, even though it would be a fairly small and quick project, there just have been some barriers as to why I haven't started it, but I do want to knit it before the end of the year, just because I think it would be a nice easy staple to have in my collection. The next yarn that I have is this. This is Rowan Kidsilk Haze, and this is in the shade Serenity. Now, Rowan's actually a fairly expensive mohair, but I got this on discount at Wool Warehouse because the color was being discontinued. I think it was like half off or something like that. So I had already worked with Rowan Kidsilk Haze in the past on my Ghost Whisperer top, and I knew that I liked it, so I just sprung for a sweater quantity of this yarn. And for this, I kind of went back and forth on what I wanted to knit. At first I was thinking of knitting the Shine cardigan by November Knits, but I think ultimately I might end up knitting the Nele or the Nele cardigan sweater by Gregoria Fibres. I think based on some of the pictures, I would have to wear something under it, but I don't really mind too much, and I think it looks very pretty and slightly delicate, which would really suit this color. Now, this color is also something that's a little more vibrant in person than it looked like on the Drops website, or on the Wool Warehouse website, and I feel like the Wool Warehouse website notoriously has bad pictures of the yarn colors. This is not the first time I've been bamboozled by them, but even though it's a little brighter than I expected, it's still very like pastel-y and soft, so I think it will look nice with that pattern. So the next yarn that I have is another hand-dyed mohair, and this is from Sveina Bjork, and this is the Kid Mohair Silk, and I don't actually know the color or any details. I ran Google Translate, like the camera edition on this, and I'll put what it says here, but this is a hand-dyed yarn that I picked up during my trip to Iceland. So earlier this summer I went to Europe. I went to Iceland for a week, and then I went to Paris and Berlin, each for a few days, and it was the first real vacation that I think I've taken as an adult internationally. Like, I had been in the continental North America before, but I'd never been to a different continent, so this was very exciting for me. And also, by then I'd already been knitting for quite a while. I brought a knitting project on that trip with me, and I knew that one of the souvenirs I wanted to bring back was yarn. So I got this at the Garnigangi yarn shop in Akureyri, and I know when you go to Iceland, like the Iceland Hand Knitting Association is like the big shop that a lot of people talk about going to, but we just didn't have time based on what we wanted to do in Reykjavik. So when we had a slower day in Akureyri, this is one of the shops I popped into, and I found this in one of the bins and I really liked the look of it. And when I went to go check out, my cashier was actually the woman who had dyed it herself, so it was really cool that I got to meet her. And I got 3 skeins of this, and I think it would be just perfect for a Cumulus top. Now, or a Cumulus blouse. The Cumulus blouse has been on my to knit list for a very long time, but I've never really gotten around to it. And I really want to knit this by the end of the year. I think this soft blue is going to be the perfect light shade for it, and I think I'm going to get a ton of wear out of it. I think it's funny how being in the knitting community also sort of warps your perception, because when I first started knitting, I thought the Cumulus blouse was ugly. Yeah, I'll say it, I did not really get the hype. I didn't really know why people were making it, but now that I have been in the thick of the community for a while now, I absolutely want to make one. I want to make more than one, and I'm in love with the whole Cumulus line. So that just shows you how your opinion can change based on who you surround yourself with and who's like hyping things up. But yes, that's the current plan for this, is to make the Cumulus blouse. So for my last yarn, it's the one that's not really technically lace weight, but it is a fluff, so I thought I'd mention it in this section because thematically it fits with the yarns in this section a little better. And this is a Suri alpaca, and this is Frida Fuchs Dufte lace in the shade Hubbards. This is another yarn that I got on my trip to Europe that I just talked about, but this one I picked up in Berlin at Yarn Over Berlin, which is a cute little shop that was tucked away in a courtyard. They had a lot of hand-dyed yarn in there, but I was actually rushing like crazy when I was in that store because we had scheduled a tour of the Reichstag, which is the Capitol building with the dome on top, and for some reason all the yarn shops love to open at like 10:30 or 11 a.m. and I had scheduled our tour for later, or for just a little bit after that. So I showed up when the shop just opened, rummaged through all the yarn, and ended up picking this out and being on my merry way. I would have loved having longer to look through all of the yarns they had there, but we just didn't have time. It was a very, very packed trip, especially once we got to mainland Europe. And this same story basically happened for the yarn I'll talk about later that I picked up in Paris, where I was running late for another scheduled thing and didn't have a ton of time to pick it out. But this is a Suri alpaca. I worked with Suri alpaca for the first time on my Zosia wrap cardigan, and I found that I really, really like it. I'm not the kind of person who's super irritated by mohair, but Suri alpaca is just on a different level of softness. And for this, I'm kind of torn on what I want to make. So I'm torn between the Sunday Sweater Mohair edition and the Fluffy Love Top by Unlucky Knits. So I have 4 balls of this, which equals to 12 or 1300-ish meters. And another big thing of mine is if I use up a yarn for a project, I really want to use most of it up. I really don't like having scraps. It annoys me. And for the Sunday Sweater Mohair edition by PetiteKnit, which I already have the pattern for, if I hold it single, I would have 1 ball left over. But if I hold it double, I would have not enough yarn. Like, I think the perfect amount of yarn to hold it double would have been 5 balls, but I only have 4. So I'm trying to think, if I made a cropped version, would it still look good? And that's where I'm kind of torn. Like, I like the Fluffy Love Top a lot, and I do have like kind of the perfect amount of yarn for that, but I'm not sure if it's too trendy for me, like if it's something I'm going to really like having in my wardrobe further in the future. So I'm a little torn on that, but I did cake this up the other night because I knew I wanted to knit with it soon. So regardless of what I make, I'll make my decision soon, and maybe you'll see this in the next podcast as one of my whips. Alright, moving on to my fingering weight yarns. The first one I have to show you is this. This is Malabrigo Sock in the shade Pearl, and it's very gray looking, but it does have a pinkish purplish undertone, and I love this color. I actually have already knitted from Malabrigo in this color, but in their bulky weight yarn, and I did that for a test knit earlier this year for Kara, for my Drop It Like It's Hot cardigan. But I'd actually bought this way earlier than I had bought that yarn. I bought this like back in February or March because I wanted to make the 7 p.m. tank by TiffKnit, but now that she has released her 9 p.m. tank, I actually want to make that instead. I like the design of that a little better for me, and you don't have to knit flat like you do for the 7 p.m. tank. So I think I'm still going to knit one of her tank tops, but I'm going to make the 9 p.m. tank instead. And I already bought the pattern for it, it just came out, but once again, I am delayed because I'm too lazy to do all my measurements. And she puts a calculator in the pattern, which should make it so easy for me, but I really just want people to tell me how many cast on just in the pattern, so I haven't measured myself yet, but I will be doing that soon for sure. I think even though it's turning into colder months, I do still plan on knitting maybe 1 tank top a month, just to keep a lighter project on my needles, and also because in San Francisco it doesn't get too cold and I can still use these tanks for layering. So unlike other people, I'm not going to stop knitting tank tops now that we're coming into the colder weather seasons here in the Northern Hemisphere. The next fingering weight yarn I have to show you is from Knitting for Olive. This is their Merino in the shade Unicorn Purple. This was, I think, my second ever Knitting for Olive order, and I bought this to make the camisole number 5 by My Favorite Things Knitwear. And make that camisole I did. The reason it's already caked up even though I haven't touched it in months is because I already knit the camisole and then I frogged it. I didn't finish knitting it. I knit all of the top, front, and back to where it connected at the underarms, and I knit about 2 or 3 inches of the body before frogging it. And the reason for that is because I did not like how I made my increases. I actually cast on this top very ambitiously as like my third or fourth project, and I didn't even really know how to make increases correctly, so I had a lot of holes in it. And then once I realized how to make increases correctly, I still had this project on the needles, and I really didn't want to frog it, but I knew it was a piece that I'd want to keep in my wardrobe for a long time, so I should just do it right. So I frogged that, but as a result, I've been a little too traumatized to work with it again after that, so it's kind of been in limbo, but I could see myself casting on Cami 5 sometime in the next few months just to get this out of stash. Another thing that I sort of mentioned in the podcast is I do have some of these yarns that were caked up a longer time ago, and staying in a cake form can stretch out the fiber, so I do want to prioritize getting some of these pre-caked balls out of my collection so that the fiber content doesn't change before I knit with it. So that's one of those, and I have 3 balls of that. The next yarn that I have in the fingering weight section is also from Knitting for Olive, but it wasn't placed in the same order as the one I just talked about. And this is Knitting for Olive Merino in the shade Dusty Violet. And for this one, I actually have the matching mohair. So I initially got these to make the August top by Calibri, and I ended up not really wanting to make that because I wasn't sure if I really wanted a mohair tank top, and that would have been maybe a little hot for me. So instead, I think what I want to make with these is actually, there's a pattern I'm thinking of making for these that hasn't been released yet, and I have no idea when it would be even put to testing or released, but there's a baby tee pattern that Blueprint Knits put on her Instagram and hasn't had time to put out the test call for, but I won't want to do something with that silhouette, just like a cute little crop tee with a high collar. And if that doesn't really come out in time, then I could also see myself making the Monica Geller tee by Sari Nordland, although I don't quite like the shape of that one as much as the one that Blueprint Knits posted. But I have plenty of time, I'm not in a rush to make it, so I can just wait until she decides to put that pattern out and see if it's something I'd want to make once she releases it. But that's the plan for this, is to make some sort of t-shirt. I have 3 balls of each of this also. So the next yarn I have to talk about in the fingering weight section is actually 3 different colors of the same yarn, but they're all going to be used for the same project. These are Cascade Heritage in the shades Navy, Lunar Rock, and Steel, and I plan on making a Rumble Raglan with these, and that's actually what I bought the yarn for. That's what it was intended for when I bought it. I just haven't gotten around to it. And as you can tell, I plan on making a fairly monochromatic version, although I have seen some bright and colorful versions come out of the test knit. I think something monochromatic is just a little more practical for my wardrobe, and so I picked these out when I was just doing a little stroll in San Francisco. I went to one of our local yarn shops and I got this at Imagine Knit, and I just haven't cast it on yet. It would be my first colorwork project, which I know isn't as complex as some of the colorwork yokes I've seen that have lots of design elements like, you know, trees and flowers and whatnot, but I think it would be a good introduction to colorwork for me. I don't see myself doing a ton of colorwork in the future because it's not really my aesthetic, like those yoked colorwork designs, but I think this would be a good opportunity to learn that skill. So to close out this section, we have a couple of hand-dyed yarns. The first one that I have is from Typical Bliss. I have her fingering weight yarn and the matching mohair plus silk yarn in the shade Boo Boo Cha Cha. So I've been following Tiffany on YouTube for a while now, but just earlier this year she released her first hand-dyed yarn collection, and it was her Spring Sweets collection, and these were colors in that drop. And last minute, like the day that she was going to close the pre-orders, I decided to just go for it, and so I got 1 skein of each. That was kind of stupid because I don't know what I can knit with 1 skein of fingering and 1 skein of mohair, and honestly I've been struggling a little bit to come up with something I want. So initially I was like, oh, maybe I can knit the 7 PM tank again by TiffKnit in the fingering and then make a little shruggy out of the mohair, but I kind of had to stop myself because I'm not going to wear a mohair shruggy. I know they're really trendy right now, but practically when am I gonna wear it? And mohair is really hard to frog, so even if I wanted to undo it later, it would just be a pain. So I want something that's a little bit more wearable for me. One thing that was kind of close to the idea of the shruggy plus tank top but a slight bit more wearable is the Sicily blouse by Bwin Knits. Now that's knitted with mohair and a strand of worsted weight yarn, but I figured I could hack the pattern to just use the fingering weight yarn instead. And that's one option I was thinking of, but even that one, while beautiful, I don't know how much wear I would get out of it. So this is one that I'm kind of undecided about. If you have any ideas, you can leave it in the comments, but that's kind of on hold for now. It's just such a beautiful color that I want to do something nice with the yarn itself, and I just don't know what the best course is to use both of them in the same project. Maybe I wouldn't even use both of them in the same project, but that's where I'm at right now with that yarn. My next fingering weight yarn is also from Typical Bliss. It's also from the Spring Sweets collection, and this is her fingering weight yarn in the shade Taro Milk Tea, and I have 2 skeins of this. Now, you might think that I bought this with the yarn that I just talked about, but actually I bought this in her second drop. So she re-released pre-orders for the Spring Sweets collection, and I ordered this on the second drop. I don't think I realized when I did the first drop how pretty of a color this was, but I saw some other people knitting with this yarn and I really liked the outcome, so I picked up 2 skeins of the fingering weight of this one. Currently, my plan for this is to knit the just released Luna Tea by CL Knits, and I've tested for her before. She's really lovely, and I was able to pick a free pattern as compensation for testing for her, and I picked the Luna Tea. I think it's absolutely beautiful, and I see myself casting it on later in this year, although I don't know when. And I think the texture will really complement the slight variegation in the Taro Milk Tea yarn, and I think it's gonna come out really good. And also, I'm kind of on the hunt for some more work appropriate clothes. A lot of the ones that I've mentioned today will be work appropriate, but yeah, I think I own like a lot of crop tops or things that show off my chest, and I can't really wear those to the office. So something like the Luna Tea would be really classy and professional, and something I could wear easily in my personal life or in my work life. So the last fingering weight yarn I have is this. This is also from Qing Fibre. This is her Dashing Fingering in the shade Walkman. And this was part of the pre-order for her Kawaii Alien collection earlier this summer. Now, this is a little bit of a funky color for me. I don't know what it is about Qing Fibre where I'm just drawn to some of the more out there shades, because this has like bits of like pastel green, but also like this darker like swampy green at the bottom, and there's also like some more neon sections and like some touches of purple. But she posted swatch videos, but they weren't like consistent swatches. Like she knit a little bit on tiny needles and then a little bit on big needles, and it kind of made this mesh effect, so I couldn't actually tell what this yarn would look like knitted up consistently with one size needles. It's a little funky and a little out there for me, so one thing I was thinking of was getting a white, like a plain white mohair to pair with this. I don't have it currently, so I'm not going to buy it right now, so this is kind of on the back burner. But yeah, I was thinking of getting a plain white mohair to pair with this and to knit something with a little bit of texture to break up the color. So one idea I had for this was the Monica sweater by Knitwear. Another idea I had for this is the rib lace raglan, but it might be a little too holey for me to wear day to day. So I'm not quite sure what I'm gonna do with this, but I think holding it with the white mohair will tone it down enough that it's more wearable for me personally. So that's the game plan right now. Alright, so moving on to sport weight, I only have one sport weight yarn right now, and that is this. This is the Drops Baby Merino in the shade Off-White, and I have the matching Drops Kidsilk also in Off-White. And I got these with the intention of making the Daphne blouse by Friday Knits. So the Daphne line is kind of what I would consider one of her, like, I don't know if this is the right word, but like flagship lines. She has 3 in the collection right now. It started off with the Daphne top, or I don't know the names of all of them, but it started with the Daphne top, which is this short sleeve version with puff sleeves. Then she released the Daphne blouse, which has the same sweetheart neckline and like under bust I-cord, but this one flares out a little bit more in the body and also has bell sleeves, so it's like more of like a baby doll type of aesthetic. And then she just released the Daphne dress, which, as you might be able to tell, is the dress version of the top, but it also has like mohair frill and mohair sleeves, so that makes it a little bit different. But out of the 3 of those, the Daphne blouse is the one that appealed to me the most, because I do like a little bit of drama and a little bit of romance in some of my clothes. Like, I love a fun sleeve, but I think the other Daphne iterations are just a little too overtly sweet for me and my wardrobe, but I think the Daphne blouse is a nice compromise where we get that sweetheart neckline and underbust detail, but the sleeves are a little bit toned down. So I also feel like looking at the pattern, it has like a very wide neckline, and I feel like it might have the tendency to slip off. So one trick that I learned that, I mean, I'll try it on, but we'll see how the fit is. One trick I learned is you can make little like bra strap clips that you just put on the inside of your garment, and when you want to wear it around a bra, you just hook it around the bra basically, and the bra will keep the shirt up. I learned that in one of my garment design classes back in college, but I might see if that's necessary for this, because the tester photos all looked like, obviously like very beautiful, but it looked like very like maybe stiff in the shoulder. Like, I don't want to be afraid of it falling off my shoulders, so I might add something like that. But that's my plan. That was my plan when I bought the yarn, and that's still my plan for this yarn. Next we have our DK weight yarns, and honestly I would say DK is one of my favorite weights to knit with, whether it's held single or caused by a fingering plus a mohair. I feel like it's still small enough to be delicate while not being so unbearably tiny as knitting a straight up fingering weight project, so I really like knitting DK weight projects. The first yarn I have in this category is a hand-dyed yarn. This is Thought to Thread Persistence DK in the shade Whiskey and Tobacco, and this is actually going to be a gift knit for my boyfriend. I don't believe in the sweater curse. We've been together almost 5 years, and as someone who knits nonstop, I just thought it'd be a really nice thing to be able to knit him a sweater. So he lives up in Seattle right now, and back in like May or April, I went to go visit, and I dragged him to a yarn shop. I dragged him to Acorn Street Shop, and on that particular day, Tyler from Thought to Thread was having a little trunk show, and we looked through all the yarns. I spent so much time there. I wanted him to pick out a color for a sweater for himself. So he picked this color out, which is not a color I would normally choose for myself, but it is really beautiful, and I could see it working really well for him. And for this, I think I'm going to make the Hansholm sweater by PetiteKnit. I was frantically looking up men's sweater patterns when I was in the store, but I wasn't a Ravelry power user at the time, so this is the one we settled on. I'm a little worried because actually reading it closer now that I like own the pattern, I think the yarn that she calls for is a little bit thicker than this yarn, but I can always just gauge swatch and do a larger size if I need to. So I'm not too worried, but I am excited to knit this. I want to get it to him before Christmas, and so I think I have plenty of time. I'm not super worried because it's mostly stockinette in the round, but I should get started on it sooner rather than later, so I think I'm actually going to cast this on this week. The next DK weight yarn I have actually is my one exception to not talking about scrap yarn, and that is this. This is Drop Spell in the shade Sink, and this is what I used to knit my Square Tee Test Knit by Knit Rohi earlier in this summer. I ended up having plenty of yarn, like 2 balls, or a little over 2 balls left over of this, so I figured it was kind of enough to make another tank top if I wanted. And the tank that I plan on making with this is the Nina 2.0 top by Lepole. Lepole's designs are a little out there for what I would normally want to wear. Like, she has some crazy mesh skirts and pants that I think would be a fun beach cover-up, but I don't see myself being able to integrate into my daily wardrobe. But this is one top that I thought was simple enough that I could wear for, you know, just going out to meet some friends for like dinner or something. And I would knit mine without the stripes. I don't think I would want it with stripes, but I really like the silhouette, the way it like slopes down the neck and has the little I-cord tie. So I plan on making that with this leftover yarn. The next yarn I have is the Drops Cotton Merino, and this is just in the shade Black. I got this because, well, you might have heard of my podcast, but basically I wanted to knit the Boring Biker Pants by Boring Knit, and I ordered a kit, and then the kit didn't come with enough yarn because I bought a size that was too small, which is my bad. So I ended up using that yarn to knit my Sporty Knit Skirt, which I talked about in the last podcast, but I still wanted to knit the pants, so this Drops yarn is a pretty similar composition. It's like 50% wool, 50% cotton, and it's a DK weight. So I thought just having a plain black like pant would be fun. It's gonna be a ton of stockinette. I already know because I've already knit like not the majority of the pattern, but I knit the entire like waist and then like hip section, and I even split for the legs and knit some of those before I tried it on and like couldn't fit it. So I know it's going to be a ton of knitting, but I figured this is something that I can eventually cast on and just kind of lazily work on when I need a stockinette project. So I'm in no rush to have these, but I really like the silhouette because I feel like the yoga pant trend is coming back. And while I'm not inclined to buy yoga pants because it reminds me of middle school, I do like sort of the straight leg silhouette, and I think having a knit pant in that silhouette will help kind of bring it into my wardrobe and elevate the classic yoga pant silhouette. So I will make these eventually, although I think it was going to take forever. I have another Drops Cotton Merino. This one's in the shade Light Beige, and I got this for my fall wardrobe because I wanted to make a polo. Now, I think Knits and Gigs on Instagram, she modified the mod tee to become long sleeves with stripes, and I really loved her rendition, but I wanted a drop shoulder one, so I ended up going with the Gemma Polo by Cookie the Knitter, and I will not be doing the stripes. I'm gonna do mine all in this one color, which now I realize maybe I should have picked up a white to do the collar just so it has a little bit of contrast, but I'm gonna see how it looks all in this one color. I thought like a tan neutral would be good for like the fall wardrobe, but I haven't even cast this on yet, so I have no idea when it's gonna get knit. But either way, I want to try knitting a polo so I can try out the collar, and I think it's a staple that's gonna get a lot of wear in my wardrobe, so that's the plan for this yarn. My next yarn is one that I'm really excited for. This is Noro Kakigori in shade 1 Naha, and I basically fell in love with this yarn after seeing so many people make June tops with it. Like, I can't even count the number of people that have made a June top with this exact same yarn. You can look through the tag and see it, but I wanted to jump on the bandwagon and also make this. This is a 200-gram ball, and this is the only ball I have, and it's going to be plenty. So I was thinking I could either make the June top and then also make another tank with the leftover yarn, but I don't know if I want two things in like, it's like a pretty bold, not like bold color-wise, but it's a memorable fabric that this fiber creates. So I thought to myself instead, maybe I can make the June top into a dress. And I'm thinking of just like knitting it as like a shift dress, so like straight up and down, maybe no shaping. I don't have very big hips or a big butt, so it should be doable for me from the tank form. But I don't know if I'm gonna have quite enough yarn to do that either. I'm gonna have to knit, I think I'm definitely gonna knit the tank no matter what, so she has two ways for doing it. You can start with a provisional cast on, or you can just start with the bottom hem. I'm gonna do the provisional cast on, and then I'm going to, when I pick up to do the rest of the body, I'm gonna see like, do a little weighing and see how many grams it requires to do X inches of knitting, and from there I'll decide if I have enough to make a dress that is socially acceptable to wear in public, and if so, I might do that. Otherwise, I don't know what other tank I would want to make with this yarn. I'm sure I can find something. I don't think it's going to be a big struggle to use it, but I absolutely love this yarn and the way that it knits up, so I'm excited to work on it, but I don't think it'll be anytime soon. Alright, the last DK weight yarn I have is kind of a funky one. This is Cascade Fixation Solid in the shade Ecru, and I initially got this because I wanted to make this one trendy top that I had seen on TikTok. It's made in like a boucle type yarn, and it just closes with two hook and eyes in the front, so it's sort of like a vest silhouette. And when I looked up the shirt on the original website, I would have thought to make this in an alpaca boucle, but they said it was knit in cotton, so I found this like funky textured cotton yarn, but now I'm not even sure if I want to make that top because maybe it was just like a summer 2022 trend. So I'm either going to try my hand at making that top and making it, freestyling it, just figuring out the pattern on my own, or I'm going to make the Vegas top by Paula Strict. I actually don't remember, but, or I'm going to make the Vegas top. So I'm undecided yet, but I think a simple silhouette would serve this yarn the best, and that's just the most basic tank that I can think of. So moving on to the worsted weight yarns, the next yarn I have to talk about is a hand-dyed yarn that's also a souvenir from my Europe trip. This is La Bien-Aimée Cori worsted in the shade Lichen, and I know I'm a little bit of a clown for picking this up because they actually carry La Bien-Aimée at a decent number of stores in the US that I could have shipped it from, and even in one that's in East Bay that I could have just taken Bart over to. But you know what? I was in Paris when I bought this. I got this at Lil Weasel in Paris, which is a super cute little yarn shop. It's split into two, like it's in a little courtyard as well, or like a hallway type thing, and there's two sides to the shop. So on the first side it's more commercial yarns and the second side is more hand-dyed yarn. And I'd been wanting to try La Bien-Aimée for a while, and she is based in France. So again, I mentioned this earlier, but I was rushing to another appointment at a museum, so I did not have a ton of time to look. I arrived there like as soon as they opened, went through in like 5 or 10 minutes, like not even 10 minutes, like 5 minutes, and picked one out, and then had to run on the cobblestones with my suitcase to our next appointment because we were also leaving that day, so we had to take all our stuff with us. So I just ended up picking this up. I got 4 skeins of this, and yes, packing my suitcase was a struggle. I did end up mailing some things home actually, but I really like this. It's my first time that I'd be working with like a Cori wool, which has a very strong gray undertone. So like even though lichen, if you see it on some of her other bases, is more bluey green, this one's very subtle. Like it's very subtly not even gray. So I think that this would be really great for a cardigan pattern that I've had in my collection for a very, very long time. It's actually the first pattern that I ever bought. Even like it was over a year before I started knitting properly. I had visited a yarn shop in San Francisco and they had showed me some patterns online, and I decided to buy that one, but I didn't knit it. Well, I did knit it, but that's a story for another time. So I think this would be a great yarn for it, and I have just enough to make the cropped version in the smallest size, which is the size I think that I would knit and prefer. So that is the plan for this yarn. So my last worsted yarn, and also the last of the yarns that I got on my Europe trip, is this. This is Istex Plautulopi in the shade Spruce, and this is an unspun pencil roving yarn. It was my first unspun yarn, and I talked about it in the podcast because I actually used this to knit my most recent test knit, which was the Walpole Pullover V-neck edition by Tamara Makes. And the reason why it's getting mentioned here is I still have 2 plates left of this, and plenty of the mohair that I used to knit with it. This is Knitting for Olive Soft Silk Mohair once again in Dusty Olive. And so I still have 2 plates of this, and I think 3 skeins of this. So plenty to make another sweater, which again is why I'm including it in this section, although it's technically scrap yarn. And for this, I was thinking of either finding a cardigan to make with it or knitting Ursa by Jacqueline Cieslak. That's knit in a bulky weight yarn, which I think based on my gauge and like holding these together, this would essentially be bulky. And I'm just not sure if I want 2 like pullover sweaters in the same exact color and yarn combination, but I do love this color, so I don't think it would be too bad, and the designs are pretty different, so I might just go ahead and knit that with this yarn combination just to finish it up. So again, I got this in Iceland, and in Iceland there's pretty much yarn everywhere. I actually bought this at an ice gear store, I think Icewear, in the town of Vik. And we were going on a glacier tour the next day, and I had been stubborn, so I didn't pack gloves or a hat or anything. And so we popped into the Icewear, and I saw that they had yarn, so I brought home 4 plates of this. Again, packing was a struggle. I only brought a carry-on suitcase with me for that trip, and I bought yarn 4 times. So this is also one of the yarns that's like commercially available in the States as well online, but it was unique to me when I saw it there, and I knew people use this kind of yarn to make like the traditional like Icelandic sweaters, so I wanted to pick some up and use it. And using it has been a real learning curve, but I think I'm getting the hang of it, especially when I have the mohair paired with it. And I mentioned this in the podcast, but this is actually the mohair that I held with the Knitting for Olive Heavy Merino for my vest number 1 by My Favorite Things Knitwear. And I had an extra ball of this because they sent me 3 when I only ordered 2, so I thought it would be good to hold with the Plautulopi, and it was a very good color match, so I bought more balls of this in order to use up this 1 ball, which is a little counterintuitive, but at least it's getting some use now. The last yarn I have to talk about today is an Aran Weight yarn. This is Boring Yarn from Boring Knit, and this is just in the shade brown. They're 100% wool. I don't think they have names for any of their yarns, but this is yarn that I bought as part of a boring box. I mentioned earlier, and I also mentioned in the podcast, how I bought the box for the boring biker pants and didn't have enough yarn to finish it. So I went on their website again and foolishly and quickly bought one of their sweater boxes because I saw they still had brown in stock for that and they didn't have any more of the pants boxes in stock. It's a completely different yarn. The other one is a 50% cotton, 50% wool, and this is a 100% wool, and it's not even the same shade. So I really played myself with that one, but now I just have, I think, like 10 or 11 balls of this sitting in stash, and I thought one good way to use them all up would be to make a dress, and the one I have my eyes on is the To the Nines dress by Karas.knit.eng again. That pattern, it like has some general size guides, but it's mostly like actually made to measure once you look at it, and I think I would make the slightly fitted version, and they all have like the little back ties, which I think are super cute. I think maybe instead of I-cord for the straps, I would try doing some double knitting and not have the ties at the top, just have it connect in the back, but we'll see once I start knitting it. I think that's going to be like a fast and easy knit because it's all stockinette in the round, and I think I also want to do a folded hem to kind of match the double knitting at the top. But that's just all one thing I'm considering for this yarn. So if you made it this far, thank you so much for hanging out with me and going over all my yarns. It was really fun to kind of, in some ways, finalize what I want to do with everything from my collection. Even if it's not what I end up ultimately doing, this video has gotten me excited about the yarn that I already own, and I can't wait to knit with it. So thanks for tuning in. I'm going to have maybe one more video up this month, and then the podcast for September up at the podcast for October up at the end of the month. So subscribe and stay tuned if you're interested in seeing that. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye!